Hello, my name is Michael Lynch. I'm the Director of Communications at the Economic and Labour Relations Review. I'm here with Mark Dean and Dan Nahum, authors, along with Jim Stanford and Rainnie of Industrial Policymaking After COVID-19, Manufacturing, Innovation and Sustainability. Mark, Dan, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
To begin with, this paper is really about setting out an alternative future for the Australian economy. A greener one, a more diversified one, and one more demanding of and reliant on a high-skilled and innovative workforce. And I guess the twist of the article is that COVID offers an opportunity to shift to this alternative future. To situate us for this conversation, could you describe the Australian economy that you want to see and perhaps identify some barriers preventing us going in that direction, be they economic or political or something else?
Sure. Should we start with the barriers, which I can talk a little bit about. Got a kind of a good cop, bad cop thing going on here. Yeah. Look, I think particularly in the last year, in this pandemic environment, some pretty clear things have become things have become clear to us, and that's that in many ways we're still kind of on that banana republic trajectory that we described early in the paper. I think the passive approaches of national governments in Australia since the 1980s to industrial policy priorities have really focused on the extraction and export of natural resources to the detriment of our higher value adding industries. And this has also been complemented by negatively complemented by the nature of the unbalanced effects of our terms of trade with other nations, exporting those raw materials and a huge reliance on the import of high value added goods, so manufacturing predominantly. The failure of our vet system to maintain pace with skilling and the needs of industry to have highly skilled workforces. And the fact that, and this is where I think Dan will be able to talk about the positives in that, even though the renewable energy industries have, they've altered traditional cost models, they've also presented us with opportunities to look at restructuring our economy. And so this pandemic scenario has really revealed the weaknesses in our economy, but our paper sort of takes on some of the opportunities that we have as well.
Would you call those economic or political impositions? It's kind of unclear because, I mean, obviously there has been political will over that period at different times. The term banana republic comes from an Australian Prime Minister. The Rudd government came to office with just endless transformation ambitions, very few of which were achieved in the long term. Which category are you putting these impositions in, just quickly?
I think broadly, they're political choices, aren't they? They're very poor political choices. And obviously, we have had leaders throughout the last 30, 40 years that have identified the political choices we need to make and tried to make headway towards those goals. And largely, I think most recently, the failure of coalition governments to make the best political choices that they could for nation building, for taking on these challenges and creating a sustainable future. And I think Dan is pretty well placed to go into detail on that.
Yeah, the Rudd point is interesting because I think what you had with Rudd when he came to office was, someone who, for all his faults, certainly had ambition about what he believed governments should be doing and what the public sector could achieve in a co-investment role with other parts of the economy. And he found that the public sector had just been sort of hollowed out. There was just a whole lot of ambition that he was unable to achieve for, I think, political economic reasons. I think drawing the distinction between political and economic is a little bit of a false binary in some institutional cases. Again, it is a deliberate policy decision to allow that hollowing out to occur or to even encourage it. I think the first instance when the COVID crisis occurred, overnight we discovered we actually had the capacity to do a lot of things that we had previously chosen not to do. But I think it's about path dependencies and kind of building the scaffolding that then allows us to pursue the industrial policies that we need to. This isn't as simple as just sort of overnight saying we're going to have an industrial policy that allows us to value add. It's something that we kind of build iteratively, and I think that's what you see when you look at so for example the Future Battery Industries Collaborative Research Center, or FBI CRC. They're kind of saying, oh well, maybe we can make some precursors at first and sort of work our way towards value adding to our raw materials rather than simply exporting them and then buying the finished products back at a premium. And I think in talking about the barriers, as he has, Mark has kind of alluded to what the goals are as well. So yeah, we'd like to see an economy that moves away from pure extraction and export towards value adding, both for our own use and also for exports. And I think one of the political parts of that is putting some distance between politics and the carbon lobby. I think that's, Australia's resource curse, as I think Keating was alluding to with the Banana Republic idea. That didn't just happen. Sure, we are, a nation that happens to have this resource endowment, but then what you do is a result of deliberate policy choices, and we've favoured extraction over value adding. I wrote a paper a while ago for the Centre for Future Work, my first big one here, called the Powering Onwards paper. And I noted that we had a very large, that was about renewable manufacturing, I should say, just to introduce it, using renewables to manufacture and making renewables in our manufacturing sector. And we have a very large carbon footprint per capita. And that's just considering our domestic emissions. It's not taking into account all the carbon we export for other people to burn. And we also have a very low manufacturing share in our economy, which is to say a really low value added share. There's a whole lot of value adding possibilities that we're missing out on. And so in other words, we're in precisely the wrong quadrant of the graph. We'd like to be in exactly the opposite bit from where we are, where we're not emitting that much carbon, but we are doing a whole lot of value adding. And many other countries are succeeding at that far better than we are. We're really an outlier in that respect. But also, I think maybe again, sort of some of the politics of it is that I think people have a pretty outdated view of manufacturing. They kind of have this sort of Dickensian dark satanic mills idea in their heads of smokestacks and polluted cities and smog and stuff. But we can actually add a lot of value using renewables.
This might be a useful place for me to ask a little more pointed question, because I think that the paper is founded on quite a lot of technical insights about the nature of manufacturing today and the nature of manufacturing in the future. So I'll ask you that in a question in just a second. I do want to stipulate that, I think it is a pretty, I just do want to agree with you that it is a pretty limited binary, the political economic binary. And I think a lot of people in the research and advocacy sort of roles, but also in the wider public, are moving out of COVID thinking, well, a lot of what we thought wasn't decisions has turned out to be decisions. Like after a decade of austerity, the amount of money that's been available for all sorts of different ventures, I think there's a lot of appetite at the moment for big thinking, and that goes beyond sort of the progressive left in different liberal states and things like that. So yeah, I totally agree with a couple of those big points you've made. So as a second question, as I say, a lot of this paper is founded on insights about what you call the servitization of the manufacturing production, which is a phrase I haven't come across before, and I'd be interested for you guys to define for us, and also the coming fourth industrial revolution. And I know Al Rainnie, one of your co-authors, has published on a couple of those areas, and a lot of this paper feels like bringing research that the four of you have done independently about these technical changes together to answer the so what question. So I guess what I'd like you to do is define those changes you're talking about to the Australian manufacturing sector, and also explain how these insights map onto your claims about the strategic challenges using your word again there, the strategic challenges Australia faces?
Yeah, well, sure, Michael. Like beginning with the servitization concept, I guess it's sort of, people may, you know, with a very basic knowledge of manufacturing, maybe think that manufacturing is no longer an important part of the economy nationally or globally, purely because it employs less and less people. But in fact, manufacturing is still the major driver of research and development and innovation in the global economy. And you know, the global automotive industry is the most heavily concentrated in terms of robotics and automation. And so what that's really done, the way that servitization of manufacturing comes into it is by understanding that what's happened over the last several decades with these technological transformations is that it's assisted car companies, for example, to not just enter into a simple market transaction with customers, but rather enter into a market-based relationship that goes on beyond just that sale of the vehicle, for example. So the servitization element is the fact that you buy a car, all of the services and the bells and whistles that are in the aftermarket portion of that transaction are attached to the car company itself. So they are able to access sophisticated supply chains and value chains, and basically tie you to an ongoing relationship. That means that buying that car connects you to their service mechanics. It connects you to their customer service. It means that you have that relationship, and you know, I have firsthand experience of this. You know, you buy a Volkswagen car, for example, you get the reminder every 6 months, hey, you're due for a service. You take that car to a Volkswagen dealer. That's where you get the service, because it's all completely vertically integrated from that perspective. Yeah, do you have a question?
Lots of different services, like are we talking like insurance and things like that, or
yeah,
or
I mean,
very closely? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Volkswagen will obviously make business relationships with insurers of choice. So they'll say, we would like you to go to this insurer. And if you don't go to that insurer, there's a chance that maybe you'll void your warranties. Perhaps it also means that if you take your vehicle to an independent servicing mechanic, you won't get that level of service. So for example, we took our car to an independent servicer because we were not happy with the Volkswagen branded service anymore. The computer itself in the car says, you know, prompts you, change oil now. And we went through that process. We changed the oil. We went to an independent servicer to have it done. And because they don't have presumably the licensed technology to actually remove that message from the system, it still shows up 6 months later. So it's still happening, even though we don't need to check and change the oil. We've already done that. And
this seems very anti-competitive. Like this
yeah,
is
you'd be right.
This is limiting
right.
competition. This is imposing competition for going to an alternative provider.
Yep.
Don't we have institutions to prevent these sorts of activities?
Well, and see, this is where the fourth industrial revolution technologies come into it. So, you know, like I said, this servitization model has existed for probably at least a few decades now. But the difference now is that with the fourth industrial revolution, you're collecting an enormous amount of data from those, you know, the digital technologies that are embedded in these smart products. So that means that a company is collecting all of that data, which means that they can personalize their services to you, but they can also collect the big data from all of their clients and customers and use that to make new business innovations and product innovations and then market them back to you. So basically, it's servitization, I think, is that shift from understanding that the production of unit costs at an economy of scale is where their competitive edge is, instead to this idea that you can service and you can target market niches and you can exploit them in new and innovative ways. So yeah, I think it's really about consolidation of global manufacturing supply chains and value chains. And in many ways it is anti-competitive, because in many ways, that's exactly how these fourth industrial revolution technologies are being used. I often think about the fact that the fourth industrial revolution is the first industrial revolution that's been predicted rather than being understood in historical perspective.
Yeah,
I've never thought of it that way. So, sorry.
I was just going to say, so you alluded to the financialization of these services as well. And if you look at where car manufacturers draw a lot of their income from the finance divisions rather than the, making and selling cars bits.
Famously, I think a couple of them started making more from financial operations in the 2010s. Okay, so
can I just Michael, and on that thought as well, I think financialization is really it's really added to that ability for companies to do that. So when you talk about the strategic situation in Australia about what's happening with the fourth industrial revolution, now that we're not making cars anymore and we have no industry policy to shape, say, an electric vehicles and an electrified transformation of our transport industries and systems whole scale, there's nothing really stopping massive global producers from producing the cars in a third country, selling them to us, and then also providing those services, at least a number of those services in third countries as well. So Australia sort of misses out. There's a double whammy there, I think, of missing out. We miss out on participating in that global supply chain, and we miss out on participating in that global value chain because we're not doing any of the sophisticated services which these car companies, for example, can then outsource to a country where the labor is cheaper.
Okay, so we're entering a new modality of globalization, and one where passive industrial policy is no longer appropriate.
Right.
Is the position.
Yeah.
Okay.
Entirely.
I find it compelling. Okay, as a third big question for you, I'm kind of interested in the underlying assumptions about how to, well, not really underlying, but the positions you're taking on how we can pursue reform. So it's one thing to have a vision for the future, and one thing to have a solution to a problem that clearly exists, which is all set up really nicely here. But there's still a how do you get from A to B question. And what you're doing in this paper is really proposing a mode of policymaking that links together a whole bunch of different areas of policymaking that traditionally we might have thought of as separate and distinct. And this is becoming common. We've got ideas like the Green New Deal or the entrepreneurial state, which I think you might mention both of those in the paper in different ways. And leaving aside the sort of economic or maybe ontological questions of whether these policy areas are inextricably intertwined or not, I'm interested in your defense of pursuing broad policy reform. And instead of defending it, I thought I would ask it in the opposite way, which is to say, do you guys see risks in pursuing a reform in this way?
Yeah, I'll have. Yeah, sure. I'll have.
Do you know what? Is it obvious what I mean? What the obvious?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, let's focus on that risk. Personally, I and I'm sure Dan shares these sentiments. There's the riskiest strategy at the moment is the drum beating for war with China. The federal government is intent on creating conflict with, our biggest trading partner that it also deems as an ideological threat. The nationalism, they're couching nationalism in an aggressive posture that will lead to warmongering. But yet we never see in Australia what other countries are beginning to do. In Europe, the Biden administration as well, is to actually go on a war footing with climate change, with actually understanding that pandemics and global heating don't care about ideology. They are things that we all face, and we must take a mission-based approach to it. And as Matsukato and colleagues have talked about, those mission objectives are what drove the space race during the Cold War. They're what united nations and peoples around the world in a clash of ideologies, but in fact, were crucial in driving new innovative transformations that dealt with social problems. And so it's just, to me, a no-brainer that you would see climate change as being served by a wide-ranging industry policy that's also part of social policy. It's important to understand that neoliberalism has lost all of its credibility, and as you said, that these years of austerity since the global financial crisis have now shown that there's plenty of money to spend, and that the political choices are that they either don't spend it on the areas that are going to solve problems, or they make other political excuses for why you can't spend it on addressing inequality or climate change. So I think that an entrepreneurial state is its time is ripe now. In the 1970s, Milton Friedman was perfectly positioned to propose a range of policy ideas and prescriptions that led to Reaganomics, that led to Thatcherism, and that then filtered through to Australia. I just think that in the face of the reality that we see, the ideas of industry policy and how to drive that through a Green New Deal or an entrepreneurial state and mission objectives is perfectly positioned to deal with these crises.
I tend to agree. I agree with all that. Sorry, Dan, before you jump in. I've worked very hard to have the journal put together a themed collection on the Green New Deal, and I'm very much on that side of the argument. I'm just concerned about, particularly in the Australian state, the capacity of a carbon lobby to make large change so impossibly unthinkable, like so far out of reach that stymies even marginal progress that might have been made. That's really what I'm speaking to. But Dan, I'm sure you're going to jump in on something else.
Yeah. That political stuff is
it could be a separate question,
and I mean that's kind of effectively what we're trying to do at the Australia Institute, which is kind of provide an intellectual and policy alternative to I guess that very entrenched big money power. I think our political leadership really
requires quotations.
doesn't deserve to be let off the hook here, if I can put it that way. Because I mean, I think really what they've been doing is kind of chasing crises, where a crisis pops up here, they fix it or do something that looks like fixing it, and in doing so, they accidentally or deliberately create another crisis, which they then need to go and sort of either fix or give the appearance of fixing over there, and then that should, and so on and so on. And so we just kind of have these, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, and I think to me that's the argument for solving things in a holistic way. And I think so I'm an ex-public servant at the Commonwealth level, and I think within the Commonwealth bureaucracy, there is certainly appetite for thinking in this more holistic way, but as you've said, the politics of it is kind of where it starts to unravel. So the policy making, I mean, of course, people in the Commonwealth Public Service understand that the world out there doesn't restrict itself to thinking in silos, and that these problems that we're dealing with are interconnected. Questions of industrial development and social development and environmental cost and benefit, like all of these things do need to be solved in an integrated way. And what's more, if they are solved, they will be solved in an integrated way, which I guess kind of alludes a little bit to that just transition idea. Like, you're not going to have a transition unless it is just, sort of thing. But even within sort of manufacturing policy in a discrete sense, we can see kind of at a more micro level what's going on here, where there are just kind of like dribs and drabs of policy response to it, often at the state level, or maybe just a little Commonwealth program sort of from time to time, but no overarching coordinated effort to say, this is what Australia can be and needs to be good at, and let's put serious commitment and thought and money into that on an ongoing basis. And I think I think what Mark was saying is that the real risk is the status quo. And I mean, I guess on the other side of the equation, another risk is letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. That's true in silo-based policy making as well. Even if you're not thinking in that holistic way, you can still encounter policy paralysis. Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't overestimate our opportunities to make significant change, but we shouldn't underestimate them either. But I think also one of the big things that's happened just kind of in the last few years, since the global financial crisis and particularly since COVID in the Anglosphere, and we're really only just recovering the language around government expenditure being an investment. Like, I mean, just sort of like
really useful point.
Time, there was just this kind of idea that like, if the government was spending money, basically what it was doing was, you know, sort of chucking it into a jet engine. And that was, you know, but I mean, now we're like, I think Mazzucato has made this huge contribution. And, you know, other people who think like her of saying, well, actually what government does is really important. And a lot of what commerce does is based on ideas that were developed in or with government. And there's no intrinsic reason that private sector expenditure or investment is always more productive than public sector investment. And oftentimes it clearly isn't, you know. And so there's a role for government co-investment and procurement driven by broader social values. So, you know, we've seen that in a lot of cases, like the global financial crisis and the Banking Royal Commission, aged care and other human services, the energy market here in Australia, spread of low quality work such as gig work, private sector decision-making has been really inimical to broader social goals. And I guess when we think about sort of what the implications of that are, it's like, well, okay, so by not making a choice or by appearing not to make a choice, we've actually made a choice.
Yeah.
And so the government tangibly needs to show the private sector where society wants to go. So that's better regulation, careful co-investment, procuring in a way that directs companies to act in particular ways. And cooperation between governments at the federal and state level here in Australia, and I guess in other federations as well. Lastly, I'd say, I'll just make this point because it's an important one. We're especially fortunate in our endowment of renewables. As developed countries go, we are the most fortunate in terms of the renewable resources that we've got. So, I mean, of course, we're already a rich country in material terms, but we're in a position for our general standard of living to rise significantly if we do the right things on the policy front and focus on industrial development, full employment and equity. And I think that's a pretty good political sell. I think that's persuasive. So I think that beats fear. But I mean, yeah, we'll have to see and hope.
Yeah, we shall see. Well, I mean, I certainly think that there is desire for change and there's frustration at the place we've come to and a frustration at drifting. And there's a real need to produce strong narratives right now that provide pathways forward before that anger turns to apathy and recedes once again. And I think in this paper, you guys provide some really good narratives, particularly about not only that the status quo is a risk, but also that that we're drifting into a new type of globalization, a new type of manufacturing sector, and that passivity in managing that transition is a huge risk. So hopefully these are ideas that can get out. The paper is called, as I say, the paper is called Industrial Policymaking After COVID-19, Manufacturing, Innovation and Sustainability, by Mark, Dean, Dan Nahum, Jim Stanford, and Al Rainnie. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Michael. Thanks.